Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Peterson, and I'm with Tridec. And to start this whole show off, I want to introduce the Matthias family, starting with Colonel Matthias' son. This is Michael Matthias. Okay, he's got his son over here, who is Michelangelo, but goes by Tico. Stand up. Okay. We've got Harold Matthias and his wife. Please, if you would, stand up. And Harold is the son of the oldest brother of Colonel Matthias. I'm saying it right. Okay. And let's see, your daughters Rebecca and Diana, both. And Norman Matthias and his wife, Mary Lee. Okay, that's all right, Mary Lee, go ahead. So I wanted everybody to meet the Matthias family to start with. And I also have to point out, and I don't know where she just hid, but this whole event is the idea, the brainchild of Karen. And where did Karen just go? She just hid. I mean, she does it all the time. She's behind me in the car. See, that's what she does. Karen Miles is the one whose brainchild this is. If I can, to start the program, I'd like every veteran to please stand up. Every veteran to please stand up. I want to say thank you. With that, would everybody please stand, because we are going to have the Star Spangled Banner by the Mid-Columbia Master Singers.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous heights o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave, the home of the brave.
Wow. Everybody please be seated. You know, I've got some opening remarks just to set the stage for the history of why we're doing this. And it's easy for those of us who live in this community and the communities of Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, to know what the Manhattan Project means. But let me just start by setting the stage. On August 13th, 1942, the Manhattan Project was established under the command of then Colonel Leslie R. Groves. 3 years and 1 day later, August 14th, 1945, the war was over. I'll do that again. August 13th, 1942, the Manhattan Project was declared. August 14th, 1945, the war was done. In between those two dates, 100,000 men and women were brought to these three sites, Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and Hanford, from all over the world. And the majority of these young men and women had no idea what they were building. On December 22nd, 1942, Colonel Franklin T. Matthias took off from Yakima on a small military plane to fly over the small towns of White Bluffs and Hanford. And as a result of that flight, which you're going to hear more about, the federal government issued a directive to acquire 670 square miles of land, almost 10% of the state of Washington. Somewhere between 1,300 and 2,000 residents who lived out there, mostly farmers, were given from days to weeks to move off their land. This included moving and getting rid of thousands of animals, all the farm equipment, and most importantly, closing schools, churches, and moving their families lock, stock, and barrel. Once the land was acquired by the government, new workers had to be found: engineers, physicists, chemists, carpenters, electricians, iron workers, cement masons, and a multitude of others, including office workers, cooks, guards, and truck drivers. Then these same individuals first had to build their own homes, a place to live, and from that they built dormitories, mess halls, water, sewer, roads, and railroads before they started construction of the reactors and the chemical separations. At Hanford, the nuclear construction camp out at Hanford quickly grew to become the third largest city in the state of Washington with 50,000 people. A secret city. Hanford construction stretched the imagination. Housing for 50,000 men and women, 386 miles of highway, including Washington State's first four-lane highway, 780,000 yards of concrete, and 158 miles of railroad track. All of this was done without the aid of computers. These were the days of slide rules and handcrafted blueprints. And it all had to be done here at Hanford under the single direction of Colonel Franklin T. Matthias. B reactor itself, the world's first full-scale nuclear reactor, was built start to finish in 11 months. The design was based on the success of Enrico Fermi's Chicago Pile 1 and the pilot plant, the X-10 graphite reactor located in Oak Ridge. B reactor was designed to produce 250 million watts of thermal energy, 1 million times more powerful than the Chicago Pile 1. They upscaled in that short period of time. At the same time, Colonel Matthias was flying over Hanford when Chicago Pile 1 went critical the first time. Most of the workers that were brought into these three sites were among the most talented in their respective fields, whether it was physics, pipe fitting, truck driving, iron workers, and most people still recognize today the names of people like Enrico Fermi, Robert Oppenheimer, or Hans Bethe. But we also need to give individual recognition to the workers, many of whom showed up here in 1943 and 44, as well as to these well-known names. And I have to point out, that includes my father-in-law, Herman Francis Toner. Okay? Many of the individuals you see here at this dedication were part of that original cadre that came in 1943 and 44. There are engineering feats and accomplishments that must be told to future generations, and it must be told before we old-timers are all gone. I repeat again, August 13th, 1942, August 14th, 1945, 3 years and 1 day, with a young colonel who was only 34 years old directing the construction of this site. For that I say, thank you, Colonel Matthias. With that, I'm going to move ahead. It's my pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Kelly, Walla Walla District Commander, U.S. Corps of Engineers. He's a graduate of West Point Military Academy. He has a Master's of Science from the University of Missouri at Rolla. He has 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he's a recipient of 2 Bronze Stars. Colonel?
Good morning. It's great to be here with you as we honor Colonel Franklin T. Matthias, who commanded the Hanford Engineer Works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during World War II. I thank the Richland Historic Streets Project, all the veterans groups, artists, performers, Boy Scouts, volunteers, and everyone who helped make this possible. It's a great job. I also thank all the veterans who served our nation. Thank you very much for your service. It is truly wonderful to see so many of the Matthias members, family members here today, and they've been introduced already, but I'll try to skim through this and make sure I draw a good connection to the Corps of Engineers here. So we've got Colonel Franklin Matthias' son Michael and his grandson Michelangelo. Colonel Matthias had three brothers, Harold, Norman, and Carl. The oldest brother, Harold, was a career teacher who also served in the Wisconsin National Guard and was a civilian instructor for the Army Signal Corps during the war. Harold's son, Harold Lee Matthias, served as Walla Walla District Deputy Engineer and also the acting commander during the 60s during the 60s and early 70s. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1980. Norman Jr.'s father, Colonel Norman Matthias, graduated from West Point in 1926 and served as the district engineer for the Corps' Seattle district from 1952 to 1956. Norman Jr. with us today served in the Corps of Engineers and is also a graduate of West Point. The youngest brother, Carl, was a civilian engineer and served as the Chief of Planning in Norfolk District in the Corps of Engineers. Thank you for being here and truly honoring the Corps and its family. During World War II, the Corps was responsible for the Hanford Engineer Works and named the streets of Richland after historic Corps of Engineer officers. But the Hanford commander, Colonel Franklin T. Matthias, never had a street named after him, and we're here now to recognize his courageous leadership. The Corps is proud of our role in leading the Manhattan Project and Hanford Engineer Works during the war. It was a very challenging time in our nation's history, and the outcome was in doubt for quite some time. Many of you know the history of the Manhattan Project, Hanford, and the historical information available today's program and the memorial service publications. Please take them home and share this patriotic story with others. And not to take away, but I'll go through just a little bit of that history as well, as Gary did earlier. On 18 June, the Corps of Engineers established the Manhattan Engineer District in New York City. It camouflaged a top-secret effort at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and here at Hanford. On 17 September, Colonel Leslie Groves of the United States Army Corps of Engineers was placed in charge of the Manhattan Project, and he was quickly promoted to Brigadier General on September 23rd. Groves was an engineer who helped build the Pentagon. Franklin Matthias selected contractors during the Pentagon's construction, so there's the connection. In October 1942, Groves recruited the DuPont Company to build plutonium production complex. Scientists who worked with DuPont to design plutonium reactors from the University of Chicago, worked with DuPont to design the reactors. Matthias was also then named the Chief of Engineers of Construction. Our nation now had a unique management team, the military, the scientists, the American industry, all in place, and we just didn't know exactly where to put it. In December 16, 1942, Colonel Matthias and two DuPont engineers headed for the American West to investigate possible production sites. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that decision in a minute, and I'll do it in Colonel Matthias' own words. In January 1943, General Groves established the Hanford Engineer Works as the site of the Manhattan Project's full-scale plutonium production facility. Matthias was named officer in charge at Hanford, and the title meant he ran the entire operation with authority over both civilian and military operations, and the rest became history. In the summer of '43, Hanford became Manhattan Project's newest boomtown. The Hanford Engineer Works successfully produced plutonium for the first test at the Trinity site in New Mexico and the second atomic bomb which helped end the war. The public was finally told the details about Hanford Engineer Works in 1945 and what its workers had accomplished, led by Matthias. Franklin T. Matthias was a man who loved big construction projects. He was known as Frank de Sum, and his pen name was the Wisconsin Engineer. He was a courageous and dedicated Corps of Engineer officers and a great American. His talents were rewarded quickly as he rose to leadership positions during the war. He was a Wisconsin National Guard officer called to active duty in 1941. He worked previously for the Tennessee Valley Authority. It has been said that he led the way at Hanford. He commanded construction of the first Hanford reactor from start to finish, within 11 months, on time, under budget, and as Gary mentioned, without the help of pesky computers. Some of the Hanford story is told in his own words in a fine book entitled Working on the Bomb, an oral history of World War II Hanford by Stephen Sanger, published in 1995. The author interviewed and recorded Franklin Matthias at his home in California in the early 80s. The book's oral history provides a tremendous insight into Matthias, the engineer, and about the Hanford project he led so well. And about the search for the site, Matthias said, "I thought Hanford site was perfect the first time I saw it. We flew over Rattlesnake Hill up the river, and I saw the whole site on that flight, and we were sure we had it. I called General Groves from Portland and told him I thought we found the only place in the country that could match the many requirements for such a desirable site. I said we'd found a place with a spur line railroad, the Milwaukee Road, right into the place where we thought the facility would be built, and our property probably would include the switch station between Bonneville and Grand Coulee right on that 230 kilovolt line. It had so much in favor of it, an area with almost no people, very underdeveloped. It was obvious it had been built by the Columbia River, leaving gravel behind it." And he went on to speak about gravel with only excitement an engineer could have. And he said, "There's nothing better than gravel, deep gravel, foundations, earthquake protections, anything you want. It was all there. It had all the advantages." And Groves then told Matthias, "Go ahead and carry out and look for more sites in California." And so, as he tells it, "We came into San Francisco on Christmas Eve, but we didn't do anything except go to a Chinese restaurant. We went to Sacramento, to the district engineer there, and we pumped him about what might be in Northern California, but there wasn't much there either. We went to Los Angeles, and we drove clear out to Arizona border. We spotted some good possibilities, but the only water source would have been the Colorado River or the aqueducts, and we knew that they were almost out of the question. We stayed overnight and spent the most of the next day driving around the region. We wrote our report on the plane back to Washington, D.C., and we got there on New Year's Eve. We talked to General Groves the next morning on the first day of 1943, and he quizzed us at length about everything, but was very well pleased with what we had found. And before the end of the month, we had the authority to acquire this site." And that was only the beginning. I'm going to go through a little bit of the scope that Gary touched on, but it was a huge project by any stretch. In a little more than 2 years, Matthias led a team of 51,000 people working or living at Hanford. They built 1,200 buildings, 3 nuclear reactors, 3 plutonium processing canyons, each of them 820 feet long, 386 miles of road, 158 miles of railroad, more than 50 miles of power lines, 4 electrical substations, and more. They had 1,800 vehicles, 900 buses that could seat more than 30,000 people, 1,900 trucks, 240 tractor trailers, 44 locomotives, and 460 railroad cars. They placed 780,000 cubic yards of concrete and moved 25 million cubic yards of earth. In the book Working for the Bomb, it was noted the overall cost at Hanford was $350 million. Building Hanford has been compared to the simultaneous constructions of 7 major industrial plants. It would be an immense task even today, and that was a big project. Franklin T. Matthias led the way on this massive effort. During the construction, Matthias also made sure he took care of his workers and their families. He built houses, medical and dental centers, schools, churches, recreation and community centers, 2 movie theaters, a baseball field, a park, 4 grocery stores, 4 drugstores, a post office, police station, fire station, library, bowling alley, 5 gas stations, and more. The Richland High School Bombers marching band playing here today represent the high school built here by Matthias. If all that wasn't enough, he also personally delivered the first Hanford plutonium shipment to Portland, in which he placed on a train bound for Los Alamos, and I learned this morning he did it in a military ambulance. For his immense successful leadership, Matthias was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal on November 15th, 1945. The award citation is printed on the plaque, which we dedicate today. And I'll conclude with his own words also printed on the plaque. It's a revealing and fitting quote from a leader who obviously placed a very high value on the people who did the work. Using his pen name, the Wisconsin engineer, he wrote, "The story of Hanford Works and the atomic bomb program is not a story of buildings or concrete or steel. It is fundamentally a story of men and women. It is a story of unselfish devotion, of patriotism and cooperation. It is a story of the thousands of scientists who worked anonymously, faithfully, and together. It's a story of designers who performed the almost impossible task of translating mathematics and experiments. It is the story of construction workers and operators who converted the work of the designers into a finished product and brought confusion to our enemies. It is a glowing story of how our country can mobilize leadership and workers to heights of cooperative achievement when the motive is sufficient." That was Colonel Franklin T. Matthias's statement, the thoughtful person, the capable engineer, the undaunted leader, the honorable and dedicated U.S. Army Corps of Engineers officer in charge of the Hanford engineer work. He led the way, and he inspires us all. Essayons.
Thank you, Colonel. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Mayor John Fox, the 60-year resident of the Tri-Cities. He has a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Oregon State. It's not WSU, but it's a pretty good school. And he started working at Hanford in 1956 under GE. He was appointed to the city council in 2002, and I hear this rumor that he's serving his third and last term as mayor. Mayor John Fox.
Thank you, Gary, and I'm joined here today by council members Dave Rose and Phil Lemley and Deputy City Manager Bill King to celebrate this occasion. Now, you've heard about what led Colonel Matthias here and how Richland was transformed into a government town in wartime and for a while afterward. But let us just suppose for a moment that this had never happened, that another site was chosen, or that the full-scale project was deemed impractical, as apparently Hitler decided. What then might Richland and the Tri-Cities look like today? Let me suggest that we look like more like, say, Walla Walla or Wenatchee, dependent primarily on agriculture, food processing, rail or water transportation. Part of the Hanford Reservation might be irrigated from Priest Rapids Dam and the once proposed Ben Franklin Dam. Our wine industry would still be growing, but we would lack much diversification of our economy. From 1942, when Richland was only 200 or 300 people and the Tri-Cities a few thousand, I doubt the whole area population would have grown to the over 50,000 that are in Richland today. So it's clear that Colonel Matthias's choice has given us a legacy far exceeding the expectations at the outset. Instead of running the plant for the wartime needs and then shutting it down like you would any other munitions plant, the Cold War brought on several phases of expansion. Still, it was clear that producing plutonium for weapons was not a perpetual need. And so there was always a major uncertainty about the future for the plant and for the city. So in 1956, under the Eisenhower Atoms for Peace initiative, the Hanford Laboratories organization was formed and given the mission to develop plutonium as a power reactor fuel. This, together with expansion of research in the biological and environmental effects of radioactive materials, laid the foundation for the later FFTF project and what is now the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Sensing opportunity, people began to leave the government town of Richland to other nearby cities so they could own their own homes. The Atomic Energy Commission then sold the houses and properties to residents, and Richland was reincorporated in 1958 as a city of 23,000 persons. Today, with Hanford production long ago shut down, it's ironic that cleanup activities and PNNL employ more scientists, engineers, and skilled workers than at the peak of Cold War production of plutonium. The technology at Hanford has spawned other local industries and suppliers. Though still a major factor in our economy, it has enabled diversification in many important ways. So now we support a population of over 200,000 in the 4 adjacent cities and 250,000 in our metropolitan area. Now, more importantly, the rapid influx of workers in the wartime era and later drew people from all over the country. This brought radical change. In the early days, the people came with different backgrounds, customs, and expectations. In the remote area of the early days, they had to create their own recreation and community institutions. Through continuing boom-bust cycles and rapid growth, influx of people from elsewhere has continued. Now, I'm one of them. I grew up in large cities in Portland and San Francisco. I came straight out of engineering school in 1951, and I expected to work here for a few years and move on, and I'm still here. More recently, with the veil of secrecy lifted, many have come from foreign countries as well. The result is a population which has always placed a high value on education and quality of life, as defined in a wide range of attributes. There's always a healthy element of missing things we used to have at home and asking, why can't we have this here also? Without this demanding population, we would not presently have a branch campus of Washington State University here, or the local performing arts organizations, or support of our professional sports teams, or the vast variety of volunteer work in charitable organizations in the community. We would not be ranked by Kiplinger.com as the second best place in the country to raise a family, or by Farmers Insurance as the safest community in the state, or as the 11th geekiest city in the country. I'm not sure about that last rating. But anyway, you see, Colonel Matthias's choice on a narrowly defined mission was a determining factor in the long-range future of not only our city of Richland and the Tri-City area, but of all of Southeast Washington. And we here are grateful to him for that choice and his subsequent work to make the Manhattan District project succeed, because of what that has brought ultimately to all of our lives.
Thank you, John. Now under the direction of Mr. Jason Rhodes, I invite the Richland High School Marching Band to perform a salute to America's finest. We've been watching them all morning. Get ready, so that's yours. I hope everybody realizes too that school hasn't started, so how they've been practicing is a good question. It's my honor now to introduce Michael Matthias, Colonel Matthias' son. I get to point out that he's a graduate of Cambridge University, England, in international relations, University of California, Santa Cruz in economics, a BA with honors in political sciences from University of California, Santa Barbara. He likes the warm South Country. And let me mention that his son, Michelangelo, Tico, who's over here, 15 years old, is an avid break dancer and a Boy Scout. And I also close by saying Michael sent his short version of his biog. So, Michael.
Thank you very much. It's my privilege to say thank you on behalf of our family for this wonderful event, for all the wonderful words that have been expressed about Franklin. I have to tell you, I'm familiar with the sensation of him looking over my shoulder. I can feel the gaze right now. But I want to share, there's been a lot about the technology and the engineering piece of putting all this together, and I wanted to share with you a little about him as a person. And one thing I want to do also before I start, we have a dear family friend in Richland, Nancy Harville, who's in the audience. Her parents, thank you, her parents were, Bar and Lou, were Frank's best friends during the construction of Hanford here in Richland. And that's a family friendship that exists till today. So that's over 70 years. So we appreciate Nancy being here. It doesn't surprise me that the location for this would be a library. I think libraries represent, as much as any institution in our society, the idea of education, the value of knowledge, and the value of opportunity. And the thing about Frank, who was extremely proud of his efforts here, and I know today is even prouder. The thing was that his contribution was, as a man, he had a complete disregard for the word impossible. Never crossed his mind. Nothing I ever said to him, he would say, you can't do that. His next question was, how are you going to go about that? And that was his attitude. And that it's striking, but seriously, he just never accepted the idea you could not do something. And if you dig back in his history, I want to tell you a brief story about the fish. Okay? So he grew up in Wisconsin, the third of four brothers. And one day, on a hot day in the summer, he was walking home across the fields with his father, and they were farmers. And he was probably about 5 years old, and the opportunity to spend some time with his father one-on-one was probably a pretty rare occasion, so he was probably pretty excited. And his father, my grandfather, stopped by a small brook where there was a tree and some shade, and took out a flask he was very fond of and took a toot, which he was apparently known to do quite often. And my father knew that he always kept like a fishing tackle in his pocket and asked him if he could have the tackle. And so his dad said, well, there's no water in the stream, you'll never catch anything, but here, go ahead. So my dad took the line and threw the hook in the water, and within minutes pulled a huge fish out of this brook. It was probably beached because there was probably less water than the size of the fish. And his dad couldn't believe it, took it home. No one else could believe it either. And his life, he told me as a child, was divided between before the big fish and after the big fish, right? And it's, you know, it's, you can't attribute Hanford to all of it, just to that, but the idea was that nothing was ever impossible, and he was always given challenges, and he always responded to challenges. And I see Tico going about addressing challenges in Boy Scouts, and it reminds me of his grandfather, that adversity is simply an opportunity, and that was his belief, and he lived that, and he did that, and that's the value, I think, that he brings. And that's the enduring legacy of this in terms of him as a person, the reminder that the only limits we establish are the ones we set on ourselves, and we don't have to listen to anyone else's view of what can't be done. And I think that's That's what comes from Hanford and his role here. And on behalf of our family, I thank all of you for this wonderful recognition, the kind words that have been spoken. You know, he was so proud of Hanford. He's loved to visit here. He came here often. And I know he and all of us thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.
Well, it's nice to hear it from the family directly. Next, we have Matt McCormick, who is the Richland Operations Office Manager. Matt McCormick was named manager of the Richland Operations Office June 9th, 2010. In this role, Matt is responsible for management and oversight of cleanup of the Hanford site. This is full circle. This is from the start, 1943 to today. So we're 70 years between those 2 points in time. With the exception of the liquid tank waste and construction of the waste treatment plant. I got to add that. Everything else is under the purview of Matt McCormick. In today's terms, Matt's responsibility are very similar to those of Colonel Franklin Matthias. Matt?
Thank you, Gary. It is quite an honor to be here today amongst you on behalf of the Department of Energy to help pay tribute to Colonel Matthias and welcome the Matthias family to the city of Richland. I also want to join others in thanking Karen Miles for putting this on, and also congratulations to Michael Salazar and Ron Gerton for their exceptional work on the bus behind me. I feel a bit of a kinship to Colonel Matthias in terms of the weight and responsibility that the government endeavor here has at the Hanford site. Far different, obviously, today than it was back then. He had a huge challenge of building something from the ground up with very little guidance and very little direction. So my job here is to close the circle on what is a very important chapter of history and protect the lands and the river we all love so much. There is no arguing about Hanford's place in history and the fact that the work done here changed the world. Under the leadership of Colonel Matthias, those men and women helped win World War II under the cloak of total secrecy and ushered in the atomic age. Now, Hanford, of course, wasn't alone in this endeavor. There's two other sites we all know about, Los Alamos in New Mexico and Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Each played a vital role in the Manhattan Project. But it seems to me that the historians have written their accounts, and people who've come to talk openly about the Manhattan Project as one of the greatest stories of human histories, and Hanford's role gets a bit slighted in that discussion. It seems to me it's always focused on Los Alamos and Oak Ridge. And similarly, when there's a discussion about Hanford, and even here in this town, it's kind of focused on General Groves, Leslie Groves, whose name is celebrated a lot, and we even have a park here in Richland after his names. But looking at the records, he was focused mostly on Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, while Colonel Matthias was here really on his own to build the Hanford site and make plutonium. So I'm personally thrilled we're here recognizing him today, and I hope this is just the beginning of people learning about his leadership skill, his achievements, and his personal contributions to the Manhattan Project's success. Two things have always been striking to me about construction of Hanford during the Manhattan Project. First, the huge scale of the effort, and a lot of folks talked about that. And it is, from my estimation, the single largest construction effort in American history. And then the second thing, maybe even more important, is the achievement in safety that was achieved here in the construction and then also the start of operation of very complex nuclear facilities like large reactors and very dangerous chemical separation facilities. And it is that unparalleled safety environment that we strive to emulate today as we clean up the legacy of the Manhattan Project and the Cold War. I'm also really excited that we're going to be able to take the Matthias family to B reactor this afternoon and show off the fruits of the Colonel's effort nearly 70 years ago. We began touring a B reactor about 2009, and more than 40,000 people have so far visited that National Historic Landmark and learn about the Manhattan Project and how Hanford helped win World War II. So I hope you will feel a sense of connection for being in a place that your grandfather or father or uncle, the living legacy of Colonel Matthias. So again, thank you for having me today. With that, I'd like to introduce Dan Ostegard and Don Sorensen, and we have a special presentation for the Matthias family.
As been talked about a couple of times, people make a big difference. And there was a fellow that I met by the name of Carl Frick. Now, Carl Frick started the Hanford site toward the later part of, about the middle part of 1943. And most folks were required to wear a hard hat. So he goes and he gets his hard hat. Now, all Corps of Engineer hard hats are red. Okay. So when he gets his hard hat, he says, "I would like to have my name, and with the Corps of Engineers symbol on it, and in gold like Colonel Matthias's," because Colonel Matthias's office was just down the hall from where Carl worked. Well, Carl went to pick up his hat. Lo and behold, it was in silver, and no, there was no castle. The sign painter explained to him that no, only the colonel has the hat with the gold lettering and the gold castle. So a couple of very skilled craftsmen that I'm close friends with have recreated a hard hat in the red and the gold lettering and the gold castle. I'd like to present that to Michael Matthias and his family.
I want to say thank you for this, but I think the thing that's striking about it is that Frank did not like offices, and he loved to be out on the site. And so this is, I think, a recognition of that. I really appreciate it. On behalf of the family, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I call back the Mid-Columbia Master Singers for America the Beautiful.
Majesties, over the frosted plain.
Wow. It's my distinct pleasure now to introduce Congressman Doc Hastings, a personal friend, somebody that I've worked with now for a number of years. He's our 4th Congressional District Representative ever since 1995. While we're here to celebrate and recognize the beginnings of the Hanford Project, I have to say that we're coming to full circle because one of Doc's major focuses has been on the cleanup of Hanford and the restoration of the site. Doc founded the bipartisan Congressional Nuclear Cleanup Caucus, and he has a reputation as an effective leader in both the House and the Senate for the nuclear cleanup issues. But I got to point out, more personally, more direct, talking about the future, Doc is also the chairman of the Committee on Natural Resources, and he has led the effort to establish a new Manhattan Project National Park. It has made it through the House. Thank you, Doc. It has made it through the Senate committee, and we hope before the end of this Congress we see it pass the U.S. Congress and this become a national park in commemoration of the things that Colonel Matthias started. With that, Doc.
Gary, thank you very much, and let me offer my welcome and good return, I guess, to the Matthias family, whichever is applicable in your case. It's interesting when you look at history how events are a big part of history, but there's always somebody that shapes those events. Generally in wartime, the events or the people that are often mentioned are those that are involved in the combat area of war. Now keep in mind, war doesn't happen unless all other discussions, I guess, are exhausted. But when you think of the Second World War, you obviously think of General Eisenhower in the European theater. You think of MacArthur in the Pacific theater. You think of Nimitz in the Pacific theater. You think of Patton in the European theater. All of these clearly had a huge effect on the Second World War. But let's go back before the Second World War. Because of the first part of the 1900s, in the teens, there was another war called the War to End All Wars. We now call it the First World War because it clearly wasn't the war to end all wars. But I think looking back, history will record that probably America made a bad judgment by hollowing out our military in the 20s and 30s until events started to overtake us in the late 30s, where you had Nazi Germany and you had Imperial Japan rattling their sabers in their respective parts of the world. But we were still not prepared, even though all the warning signs were there, until December 7th, 1941. A day later, we were at war with Germany and Japan. And all of a sudden, individuals started emerging, like those that I mentioned before. I mentioned General Eisenhower. Just to put things in perspective, in 1941, in March of 1941, General Eisenhower was a lieutenant colonel in March of 1941. In February of 1942, he had received his temporary 4th star. That's how quickly men that were called up were given responsibility. Colonel Matthias certainly follows into that category from my point of view. Called up, as I heard today, by the Wisconsin National Guard, or was part of the Wisconsin National Guard. It was called up. And only 34 years old. That's one of the things that struck me. Only 34 years old to come out here and see if we could challenge what was rumored worldwide. And what was rumored worldwide was that Nazi Germany was way ahead of us in atomic weaponry, and they were ahead of us in establishing jet aircraft. Those two events, had they been true, could have changed the outcome of the Second World War. But Colonel Matthias was tasked with coming up with the project, at least part of the Manhattan Project, that obviously ended the Second World War. But we also need to remember that the defense production after the Second World War here, again, started by Colonel Matthias, could be largely said that ended the Cold War. So there are events that shape history, and certainly Colonel Matthias was one of those, and we are eternally grateful for him. As Mayor Fox pointed out, his laying out the city of Richland. Now, full disclosure, I grew up in Pasco. I'm part of the Tri-City area, but Pasco and Kennewick is certainly different than Richland, at least during the time that I grew up. And I see a lot of head shaking out there. You're all Tri-Cityans, and you know that. But nevertheless, it certainly did shape Richland. And so the question is, what would have, as Mayor addressed, what would have happened had the Second World War and that event not happened? Well, there are two huge assets that brought the Manhattan Project here. One, of course, was the Columbia River, and the other was Grand Coulee Dam. The third asset was no people. Well, we have resolved that now because there are people living here, and as a result, we have a very robust economy. But I think it is important, very important, to commemorate what happened here, because it certainly did change history and is continuing to change history. And I want to thank all of the people that came to me earlier on talking about preserving the B reactor, and you know who you are out there. How many people here have had an opportunity to go out to the B reactor? See, it's remarkable. How many people here have been on top of Rattlesnake Mountain?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. Well, there are more people that need to enjoy that. Now, one can understand during defense production and certainly during the Second World War why there wasn't access to this site for all of the reasons of secrecy and so forth. And there's also a good reason why there was not access to the top of Rattlesnake Mountain, for exactly the same reason, where you could view what was going on. But we're no longer in defense production here. We are in a transition period where TRIDEC and others are leading the effort to get more of the Department of Energy land. Matt has been very much involved with that, so we can expand our economy. But I think an integral part of that needs to be the Manhattan National Park, of which the B reactor will be the focal point. Because what we should do is to celebrate that technology that has kept us free. It's efforts of those individuals that has kept us where we are today. And finally, one last thing, and I guess I always have to talk about that because one who sometimes is very critical of regulations and over-regulations from the government. If my timeline was correct, what Colonel Kelly said, he came here in December 22nd, flew over the site, obviously had done some preliminary work, flew over the site, saw the assets. Less than a week later, he was in California eating Chinese food and traveling to LA. Not much to see down there at that time, I guess. And then, by my calculations, less than a month later was given the okay, and a short time after that, people were displaced. Now, could you possibly do that in today's world? Can one imagine what the first environmental impact statement would be? So, you know, I just say that. I guess I have to mention it because it's in my DNA. That's the only reason I say it. But I think, and I'm paraphrasing, I think what Colonel Matthias said, extraordinary people can do extraordinary things when given the opportunity. That's what America is all about. And this area here has played a very, very big role in that in the last century. And we need to celebrate that. That's why we're here today. And we need to commemorate that in the future. That's why we need to make the Manhattan Project a national park. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Doc. Just one more introduction, and it's a little bit of a surprise, but Tim Montgomery sitting back here is the guy who did the landscaping around the bust, so I want to recognize Tim as well. With that, we're going to close with, very appropriately, the Richland Bombers High School Marching Band playing the Richland Bombers Fight Song. my knowledge, there is only one high school that is called the Bombers, and you just saw them. Okay, I want to close by saying again, and Karen Miles just tends to move around a lot, but we need to say thanks to Karen Miles. I think she's back here sitting in her car again, but this is Karen's brainchild, and we are taking the Matthias family out on a tour of B Reactor, as you just heard. But anybody that wants to come and say real quickly hello to the Matthias family and say thank you for what Colonel Matthias done, this is the time to do it. Our ceremony's over. Thank you very much.